All right, we're diving into some pretty intense stuff today.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
talking about all the changes to U.S. immigration policy in President Trump's second term.
Lots to unpack there.
But we're going deeper than just the laws and the legal jargon.
Right.
We want to understand how these changes might actually impact people and communities.
Exactly.
And we're going to use a pretty interesting lens to do that. A satirical film called A Day Without a Mexican.
I'm glad we're talking about this film. It's a really clever way to make us think about things we might not usually consider.
Exactly. So first, let's talk about the policy changes themselves. The second term was like a whirlwind of executive orders, one after another.
It's pretty remarkable.
National emergency declarations, shifting money from the military, even labeling cartels as terrorist organizations. Was all this expected?
Well, the speed and the scale of it all were definitely surprising. Declaring a national emergency let Trump bypass Congress and use billions, like almost $8 billion, from military projects to build up the border. So we're not just talking about walls here, but also more surveillance, drones, a much more fortified border, almost like a militarized zone.
And that's just one thing. There's also the Remain in Mexico policy coming back, which makes asylum seekers wait in dangerous places while their cases are being processed.
Right.
Didn't that policy face a lot of legal challenges the first time around?
It did, and a lot of legal experts think this new version will have the same problems. There are big questions about whether it's fair and if it goes against international agreements about asylum.
Yeah.
This is going to keep the courts very busy.
Then there's the CBP One app being shut down.
Right.
That app was supposed to help migrants with the legal immigration process. You know, schedule appointments, apply for work permits.
Yeah.
What was the reason for getting rid of it?
Well, the administration said it was being used by people trying to cheat the system and that it was actually helping people enter illegally. But critics say it's just another obstacle, another way to make legal immigration even harder.
Yeah, I see.
And the fact that over 1 million appointments were canceled shows how much of an immediate impact that decision had. And this actually brings us to an interesting connection with A Day Without a Mexican.
Okay, let's talk about the film. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a mockumentary that imagines what would happen if every single Mexican in California just disappeared. Poof, gone. What's the point the film is trying to make with this crazy idea?
It's satire, and it's really effective. By creating this unbelievable situation, the film shows us just how important Mexican Americans are to California and really to the whole U.S.
Yeah.
It forces us to see all the things this community does that we often don't even notice.
So it's not just about the economy, right? Even though I imagine that's a huge part of it. The film must show all kinds of industries just collapsing.
Absolutely. You see farms that can't harvest their crops, construction projects that are just abandoned, restaurants and shops closing down. The economy basically starts to fall apart.
Right.
But it goes deeper than that. The film also highlights the cultural loss, the traditions that disappear, the communication breakdowns, the fact that familiar faces and voices are just gone.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is.
It makes you wonder if any of this, even though it's exaggerated, could actually happen in real life.
That's the brilliance of satire. It uses humor and exaggeration to point out things that might be uncomfortable to think about.
Right.
Of course, the film takes it to an extreme, but it raises real concerns about what could happen if there were mass deportations or policies that make it almost impossible for immigrants to live and work here legally.
Okay, so we have these big policy changes and this film that makes us think about what they could lead to. But what about the legal side of all this? We talked about the Remain in Mexico policy being challenged in court. But are there other legal issues that could cause problems?
Definitely. Several of these measures are already facing lawsuits, especially the ones about using emergency powers and how the military's money is being used.
I see.
Critics argue that these actions go too far and set a dangerous example for the future.
And what about designating Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations?
Right.
That seems like a really big deal with a lot of potential consequences.
Absolutely. It's a complicated issue, and legal experts don't all agree on whether it will actually be effective.
Okay.
Some say it will give law enforcement more power to go after cartels, possibly freeze their assets, and improve cooperation with other countries. But others worry it could lead to more violence, harm legitimate businesses that have ties to Mexico, and even make it harder to provide humanitarian aid.
So it sounds like there's going to be a long legal battle over all this, and the outcome could have a huge impact on U.S. immigration policy going forward.
Without a doubt. The courts will be dealing with these cases for years, and their decisions will shape how immigration is enforced and how millions of people's lives are affected.
This is already a deep dive, and we've only just scratched the surface.
We've laid the groundwork, we've seen the big policy changes, gotten a glimpse of a possible future through A Day Without a Mexican, and acknowledged the legal challenges that are coming.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to take this even further. We're going to bring this discussion closer to home, exploring how these changes might impact your life, your community, your reality.
We're back with the deep dive. We've been talking about some pretty big changes to U.S. immigration policy, haven't we?
Yeah, and trying to understand what those changes could mean for real people using A Day Without a Mexican as a kind of starting point.
Right. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
We've talked about policy on a national level, but these decisions, they don't just stay in Washington.
Yeah, they have real effects on people everywhere.
Exactly. So let's try a little thought experiment. Close your eyes for a minute and imagine this. A day without. And you fill in the blank.
Okay.
A day without a specific immigrant group that's part of your community, your daily life.
Interesting.
Now, really picture it. What's your day like without them? What feels different?
What's missing?
Exactly. Is it something obvious, like your favorite restaurant being closed?
Yeah.
Or is it something more subtle, like just a different feeling on your street?
Maybe you realize you really relied on that mechanic who knew how to fix your car, or you miss a cultural event you always went to.
Exactly. The point isn't to make you anxious, it's to help us see something we often take for granted. How connected our communities are, how important immigrants are in our everyday lives, even if we don't always realize it.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in policy debates and forget about the real people involved.
Right, but when you imagine the empty spaces, the missing faces, it becomes much more personal.
And this thought experiment actually connects back to the policy changes we talked about, like the CBP One app being shut down.
Yeah, that app, even with its problems, was really important for people trying to come here legally and get work permits. And agriculture is a perfect example.
Right, we're already seeing farms struggling to find workers, crops not being harvested. That disruption, those effects are happening now.
And it's not just agriculture. Construction, hospitality, healthcare, all these industries depend on immigrant labor. These new policies, the uncertainty they create, it's making it much harder for these industries to function.
And I keep thinking, these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real people, families, lives that are being disrupted by decisions made in Washington.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to connect these big policy discussions to individual stories. When we see the faces, hear the voices, the impact becomes real.
It also makes us ask some tough questions. I mean, maybe there are good reasons for stricter immigration control, but are we really thinking about the potential costs, the downsides?
Right. Are we prepared to accept economic problems, maybe losing some of our cultural diversity, the human cost of all this?
And A Day Without a Mexican, even though it's a satire, really forces us to face that question.
It shows us a world where those contributions are gone, and it's not a good picture. It's like a wake-up call. A reminder that our communities are way more connected than we often realize.
Decisions we make, policies we support, they don't just affect those people over there, they affect all of us.
So as we keep talking about this, let's remember that connection, that human element, because in the end, it's about finding a balance, a way to manage immigration challenges while also being compassionate and fair.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've really been exploring some complex stuff with U.S. immigration policy.
Yeah, we have. We've seen how the changes made during President Trump's second term could play out, using A Day Without a Mexican to help us visualize the potential impact.
And we even tried to bring it closer to home by imagining a similar scenario in our own communities.
Right, thinking about what it would be like without certain immigrant groups we interact with every day.
It's been a lot to take in, and honestly, it can feel a bit heavy.
It can, but we don't want to leave you feeling overwhelmed.
Right, because even with all these challenges, there's always hope.
Absolutely. And there are things we can do. Awareness is the first step.
So true. Once we understand how these policy decisions affect people, once we see how connected our communities really are, we can start to make a difference.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? What can we actually do?
Well, one of the most powerful things we have is our voice.
Right.
We can contact our elected officials, tell them what we think, and encourage them to support policies that are both effective and humane.
It's easy to feel like one voice doesn't matter, but trust me, it does. elected officials listen to their constituents.
Yeah. A letter, a phone call, even an email can make a difference.
And beyond that, we can talk to people who have different viewpoints than our own.
Right. It's easy to just stay in our own bubbles, surrounded by people who agree with us.
But real change happens when we step outside those comfort zones.
It's not about trying to change everyone's mind. It's about listening and understanding.
Exactly. Finding common ground so we can move forward together.
And part of that means learning more about immigration ourselves and helping others understand it better.
Remember, the sources we talked about showed us there are many different perspectives on this issue, each with valid points.
We need to approach those perspectives with an open mind, even if we don't agree with everything. Knowledge is power.
Definitely. The more we know about the history of immigration, the current policies, and how it all affects real people, the better we can advocate for change.
And don't forget all the amazing organizations working to support immigrants and fight for their rights. Nonprofits, legal groups, community organizations, they're doing so much good work, often with very little.
Absolutely.
We can support them by donating, volunteering, or just spreading the word about what they do. Even small actions can make a big difference.
And remember, change takes time.
It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
We need to be persistent, patient, and believe that what we do matters. Even small actions contribute to a bigger movement. So we want to leave you with a sense of hope. These challenges are real and the issues are complex, but we believe that if we talk to each other, learn more, support those working on the ground, and speak up for what we believe in, we can create a fairer and more compassionate world for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.